Imagine painting 100,000 replica Van Goghs in a cramped studio for 20 years. Well, this was the life of Zhao Xiaoyong and thousands of workers in this tiny village in Shenzhen. Today I'm recommending a documentary called China's Van Goghs. Zhao Xiaoyong was born in rural Hunan province. His family lived in poverty, and he ended up dropping out before finishing middle school. In 1989, he joined the massive tide of rural migrants flooding into Shenzhen. Shenzhen at the time was just starting its extraordinary economic transformation. From a small fishing village in the 80s to now the tech capital of China. After Mao's death, during what was known as the Reform and Opening Up era in the late 70s, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping declared Shenzhen China's first special economic zone, a place where foreign investment, private enterprise, and market forces would be allowed to operate in ways that were impossible anywhere else in China at the time. Zhao arrived with almost nothing. He ended up doing construction and found work in a ceramics handicraft factory. In 1996, an opportunity came up. Someone pointed him toward a small village in Shenzhen called Dafen. In 1989, a Hong Kong art dealer named Huang Jiang spotted an opportunity that nobody else had seen yet. He noticed that cheap land and cheap labor in Shenzhen, combined with the proximity to Hong Kong's established export networks, created a perfect setup for producing replica oil paintings at scale. He brought a small group of painters to this village on the outskirts of Shenzhen and started filling orders from Western buyers. There was a huge demand. The West wanted replica paintings. Shenzhen had the hands, and Hong Kong had the connections to move the product. Word spread fast. By the early 90s, waves of migrant workers and recent art school graduates were pouring in, all drawn by the same promise: a chance to make a living from painting, even if that meant copying. At its peak, over 60% of all oil paintings sold worldwide came out of this one tiny village. Every day, massive rolls of canvas were unloaded from trucks and stretched across frames. Zhao had no formal art training. He had to teach himself entirely by trial and error. In the beginning, he couldn't sell anything. He borrowed money from everyone he knew just to keep buying canvas and paint. From small beginnings and hard work, he built everything: a studio, a livelihood, and a family operation. Zhao and his family, working out of a small apartment studio, produced over 100,000 Van Gogh replicas over 20 years, working overtime in the hot, humid heat of southern China. Zhao said he fell in love with Van Gogh because he saw a man who kept creating through poverty and hardship. For someone in Zhao's position, that was not an abstract idea. That was his actual life. He was also working in obscurity. Van Gogh famously sold only one painting his entire lifetime. The painters of Dafen, who earn almost nothing for their work, feel that parallel. One of the most powerful moments in the documentary is when Zhao and his fellow painters gather to watch the 1956 Hollywood biopic Lust for Life, the Kirk Douglas film about Van Gogh's life. They sit together in a cramped studio, surrounded by their own Van Gogh replicas hanging on every wall, and they are crying over the life of a man who died over a century ago, and whose face they know more intimately than almost anyone else. They see him as someone who suffered the way they suffer, who worked without recognition. Van Gogh died broke and unknown, and now his image is a global commodity being mass-produced by people who are also broke and largely unknown. There's something profound about a group of people who earned their living through Van Gogh's posthumous fame, and who simultaneously identify with the obscurity and poverty he suffered during his actual life. For years, Zhao had the dream of seeing the original paintings in person. He believed that if he could just stand in front of the real paintings, something would click, that 20 years of copying would finally connect to something true. The filmmakers weren't even sure he would go through with it. They spent months filming him talking about the trip, uncertain if he'd actually follow through. When he finally commits, the trip becomes a pilgrimage to meet his mentor, and a study mission to finally see what he had been copying all his life. They had barely been in the Netherlands for a few hours, and they were heading towards the museum when they stumbled completely by accident into a shop selling his own paintings. It was not a gallery, not even an art shop. It was a souvenir stand. His paintings displayed along umbrellas and fridge magnets, and they were being sold for 8 to 10 times what he was paid to make them. Then he walks into the Van Gogh Museum and sees the original for the first time. After 20 years and over 100,000 copies, he finally stands in front of the paintings he has spent his entire adult life reproducing. His eyes filled with tears, he stands there for a long time, gazing in silence.
颜色不一样。
He comes out of the museum and crouches by the roadside for a long time. Lots of mixed emotions.
画了梵高作品20年了，抵不到博物馆里面的一幅作品。
Just before dark one evening, they wandered the streets and stumbled upon the real-life location of Van Gogh's cafe terrace at night. He says it was exactly like the painting, and the sky is really this bright. Zhao started painting right there outside the cafe, not from a photograph or a computer screen, but from a real scene. He then travels to Van Gogh's grave to pay his respects. And through the only way he knew how to pay respect, he lights 3 Chinese cigarettes at the graveside and lets the smoke drift upwards like incense, the way you would honor a Chinese ancestor. A Chinese migrant worker burning incense at the grave of a Dutch post-impressionist painter who died in 1890. That's an image you don't get to see every day. That visit to the grave was also a deep gratitude that came from life itself. Because Zhao grew up in poverty, and it was Van Gogh who fed him, who gave his family stability, who put his children through school. He returns to China with deeply mixed emotions. The trip was everything he hoped for, and a reckoning he wasn't fully prepared for. He describes himself as a painter, but he genuinely doesn't know if that makes him an artist.
我到底有没有成为一个艺术家，是吧？我到底有没有什么东西值得别人欣赏？
In Chinese, there's a difference between 画工 and 艺术家. A 画工 is a craftsman, or literally a painter worker. And 艺术家 is an artist, someone with a vision, a voice, a creative identity of their own.
毕竟我们是一个画工，你知道吧？要从一个画工成为一个画家，或再成为一个什么，那确确实实是很难。我觉得一直是这么认为的，你知道吗？
我是这样认为，画家、画师、画工，这只是个概念名词，
一个概念哈，
一切都不光重要。我觉得更重要是你自己的一个定位。
For 20 years, he has been an extraordinary 画工. The question he's asking himself now is whether he considers himself an artist. The painters in Dafen are not choosing copies over original because they lack ambition or creativity. They're only doing it because the market gives them no other choice. Dealers don't fly to Dafen looking for the next great original Chinese painter. So the choice these painters face every single day is not really a creative choice at all. It's an economic one. Zhao's paintings were being sold in Amsterdam for 8 to 10 times what he was paid to make them. That kind of exploitation is structural. It's a market that finds the cheapest possible source of something people want and extracting maximum value from it. The Western buyers all profit enormously from a supply chain that begins with a man sleeping on the floor of a studio in Shenzhen. Back in China, Zhao finally puts down the copies and picks up the brush for himself. His first original paintings are much more personal to him. He travels back to his hometown and paints his elderly grandmother, her face mapped with the deep lines of a long, hard rural life. After 20 years of painting a stranger's face over and over again, the first people he paints are the people closest to him, the people who are always there for him. He then paints a series he calls Dialogue with Van Gogh, paintings in which he portrays himself in the presence of the Dutch artist. These works occupy an interesting middle ground. They still use Van Gogh's style, his brushwork, his color palette, but the subject is now Zhao himself. He's inserting himself into the conversation. It's a transitional body of work, not fully free from Van Gogh yet, but no longer hiding behind him either. I wasn't able to find if this was his original studio or if this is a new one, but he's still there, he's still in Dafen. In early 2025, he held his first ever solo exhibition of his original works in Shenzhen, titled China's Van Gogh. The show displayed around 40 of his original paintings alongside works by his family. His exhibition sparked enormous interest online thanks to this documentary, and hundreds of visitors come to his studio every month. 100 years ago, Van Gogh's paintings were ignored by the world. He only sold one painting his entire lifetime and died in poverty and depression. 100 years later, Van Gogh's paintings are known across the world, and they have fed tens of thousands of people half the world away. People born into the same poverty he spent his life painting. If Van Gogh had known that in southern China, a group of people born into hardship were able to feed themselves and their families through his art, he would have surely found some comfort in that. This is a story about art, and it's a story about what happens when someone who has spent their whole life making things for other people finally decides to make something for themselves.